We'll go ahead and get started. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rachel Paul with IAAP. Thank you for joining us for our second webinar in our EU webinar series. Today, we'll be focusing on e-commerce. Just a few items to go over before we get started. We do have captioning available, and you can select the closed captioning icon in the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will also be sharing stream text links for German, Spanish, French, and Swedish, and English, and those will be posted in the chat. Microphones are muted to prevent any background noise or disruptions. And we encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A throughout, and if time permits, we will get to those at the end. The chat will be monitored for any general dialogue or technical issues. And we'll also be sharing for any questions that we do not get to during today's presentation. We will have a after the webinar follow-up session on June 2nd, and we'll also be sharing that link in the chat. I'm happy to turn over today's presentation to our moderator, Susanna Lorin.
Thank you, Rachel. So welcome, everyone. Let's start with the fascinating translation service we have. We have live captions, and as Rachel mentioned, we do machine learning, AI provided translations as well. So we will have this in 4 languages apart from English. So and we last time we got this message from the European Commission that they liked our way to do this as a Eurovision of accessibility. So let's do the same thing again. Rachel, if you will support me with the chat. Vous pouvez lire les sous-titres en français si vous suivez le lien fourni dans le Chat. Sie können das auf Deutsch lesen, wenn Sie dem im Chat angegebenen Link folgen. Puedes leer el español si sigues el enlace provisto en el chat. Du kan läsa texten på svenska om du klickar på länken som vi lägger i chatten. And hopefully that will cover the most important thing today, mainly that everyone that needs the translations also find the translations in the links in the chat. So welcome, everyone. I'm happy to see that we have a lot of participants even today on the second webinar in our series. And first of all, I would like to tell you a little bit about the organization behind this event. As I've seen, we have both members and non-members on board. And IAAP is the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. We have thousands of members in more than 70 countries around the globe. ICT companies, assistive technology companies, accessibility expert companies, end user organizations, universities, public sector organizations, and increasingly e-commerce companies as well. So that's why we are today focusing on e-commerce. And to be a member of an international organization is fantastic in many ways. Of course, you get to share experiences with people from all over the globe, and also our professional certifications are recognized over the world. So that's just some of the benefits. But also we know that there's a need for local and regional expertise, of course. So that's why we work with chapters. So in Europe, we have the German-speaking chapter covering Germany, Austria, and the German-speaking part of Switzerland. We have the Nordic chapter covering Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Finland. We have the UK chapter, and also just recently we have started a Spanish chapter. And on top of all these chapters, the local and regional ones, we also have the kind of EU level umbrella of IAAP, just to make sure that we can provide services around EU legislation and all the harmonized requirements that we now have on the EU level. So that is why we are doing this initiative also in the EU. In the first webinar of this series, which is recorded and to be found on our website, of course, we discussed the need for alignment among accessibility experts as a basis for European accessibility legislation to work the way it is intended. And today we will focus on another very important and equally relevant topic, which is kind of the next step when it comes to EU legislation. The European Accessibility Act covers many sectors, but today we will focus a little extra on the e-commerce side, as we have got a lot of interest from companies selling online. And currently we are discussing with some of the really big players in this industry to become members of IAAP. So to set the scene, and we will get a quick overview of the legislation, and then we will turn to our distinguished panel, and then we will open up for Q&A. So, but the person who knows most about this legislation and who has been working with disability issues from the Commission side for longer than I can remember is, of course, Inmaculada Placencia Porrero, and she is the Senior Expert on Social Affairs in the Unit of Disability and Inclusion in DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion of the European Commission. So please, Ima, would you like to give us a very brief overview of the European Accessibility Act so that everyone is on the same page when we start this discussion?
Okay, thanks very much, Susanna, for the invitation to share with you the Accessibility Act, and in particular with a focus on the e-commerce services. I think it is really a great issue to have this seminar so that people can come together and get an overview of where we are. So I will give a short overview of the strategy, of the Accessibility Act, and telling what are the key provisions. I will focus a little bit on the specific provisions for e-commerce, and I will say a little bit about the next steps. So, well, the Accessibility Act, and I have presented it many times, so many of the audience, I was looking to who is in the participant list, but I see also quite a lot of new names, so I'm really very happy for that. So the Accessibility Act basically is a directive that contains obligations for economic operators to place products in the market or to deliver services that comply with certain accessibility requirements. The intention is to harmonize the European market and to ensure a common level playing field of accessibility. The Accessibility Act is centered around two main components. In one is putting those accessibility requirements for the products and the services, certain key products and services, and on the other hand, it uses exactly the same products and services to render operational the accessibility obligations in other EU acts that contain some accessibility obligations. And I will provide some examples in a second. So what are the products? And some of them are very important for the subject matter of today, because we are talking about consumer general purpose computer hardware and the operating systems, certain self-service terminals, including all payment terminals and terminals dedicated to the provision of the services in the directive, including ATMs, for example, and ticketing, check-in, and self-service terminals for information. We have got consumer equipment basically used for electronic communication services, so telephones, tablets, anything that is used for communication. And then we also have got equipment used for audiovisual media services, and finally e-readers. On the services, we have electronic communications, with exception of the provision services used for the provision of machine-to-machine services, access to audiovisual media service, certain elements of transport services, addressing mainly websites, mobile device-based services, electronic ticketing, and information in real time, consumer banking services. And I want to highlight also this because some of the elements here for consumer banking services are also very relevant for e-commerce, e-books and dedicated software, and e-commerce. And as I was saying, we have got some additional elements like the answering to emergency communications, the obligations that are to be decided by the member states in relation to the built environment. Here, I would just like to say that although we put optional requirements, either member states buy in or the buy out. If they buy in, then the obligations become compulsory. Yeah, the requirements on the built environment becomes compulsory. And as I said, we have this element of other EU acts, in which I would like to highlight public procurement, for example, or the use of EU funds, where the requirements in the Act, the accessibility requirements on the Act, can be used to buy accessible or to spend EU funding in accessible ways. So what are the key provisions for products? We have the obligations to place the products in the markets that comply with accessibility requirements, and then you get the access to the whole market. So basically products can freely circulate in the market. There are specific obligations for manufacturers, authorized representatives, importers and distributors, so that the chain from the manufacturing and to the delivery to the consumer accessibility is maintained in that chain. When products are complying with the accessibility obligations, then we have got the CE marking being adhered to the product, and we have some provisions related to enforcement that I will discuss a little bit more in detail now. And let me now tell you what are the obligations for service providers. They are similar but adapted to the service sector. So you have some accessibility obligations. If you deliver the service complying with those obligations, then also the service can be distributed in the whole Europe. You have the free movement benefit, and there are certain obligations for providers to maintain the services, always complying with the requirements, even when they change the service, and some others. And we have got some hello? Oh, okay, sorry. We have got some specific obligations for, as I was saying, for the enforcement. Enforcement begins both for products and services in a soft way, meaning by self-declaring compliance, but that is complemented by having authorities or market surveillance for products, or what we have called authorities for checking compliance of services, that have to see that what is really placed in the market and distributed is accessible. And finally, we have the possibility for consumers and public bodies or even private associations that have got a legitimate interest to engage before the courts to ensure compliance with the accessibility requirements of the directive. And to that end, the directive provides for penalties that need to be effective, proportionate, and dissuasive. And the intention is really that if there is lack of compliance, the intention is to have remedial actions so that products or services are brought into compliance, and not to have disproportionate or exaggerated penalties, but really to make sure that compliance is at the end happening, because the intention is to have products that can be used by persons with disabilities because they are accessible. There are a number of exceptions, and I mention it here because one of them is microenterprises. For services, microenterprises providing services are exempted from the directive. And this is very relevant in the area of e-commerce, where you have also some small companies selling products on and services online. And that is really very important. The accessibility requirements are protected by some safeguards. One is disproportionate burden, so the requirements need to be applied until they do not impose a disproportionate burden. And there is also the safeguard of fundamental alteration. So when you apply the requirements, the nature of the product, the essence of the product or the services have to be maintained. Now, the requirements, the accessibility requirements of the directive are in Annex 1, and they are functional, but the directive provides for the possibility of developing standards and technical specifications under certain conditions. Those provide presumption of conformity. So if you comply with the standard or the technical specification, then you are presumed to comply with the obligations under the directive. And it requires the Commission before 28 June this year to have a mandate for products, and we have the possibility of having a standardization mandate for services. And we have the possibility, for example, for lack of interoperability, to have binding technical specifications that contains compulsory accessibility requirements. Of course, let me go now to the mandate and continue with the mandate. We are working on the mandate. We have placed the issue in several standardization groups and for starting the discussion. And the intention, and we have said it before, is to harmonize the market. So we would like to ensure consistency with already existing standard and legislation at European level in the context of web accessibility and in relation to mobile apps. But for the rest, we have a pretty open discussion. Of course, we have in mind the standards that have resulted recently for the built environment, for the accessibility of the built environment, and also the design for all process-oriented standards that will be taken on board when preparing the mandate. So the directive also, to ensure consistency in implementation, requires the creation of a working group with the market surveillance authorities and those authorities responsible for compliance of services and users and consumers. Let me go now to the specific requirements for services. Basically, the requirements for services are in Annex 1, Section 3, and they are of the following nature. First, you need to ensure the accessibility of any products, of the products used in the provision of the service. This is very relevant, for example, when you're doing a payment for e-commerce, because if you're using decoders or those kind of products would have also to be accessible. Then we have to provide information about the functioning of the service in accessible format and the accessibility features or characteristics of the service and their interoperability with assistive technology. This is the second general obligation that is for all services. And the websites where the service is provided and the related online applications and applications or services that are provided through mobile devices, including mobile apps, will have to be accessible following the requirements that are in the web directive, and they come from the W3C WCAG, perceivable, operable, and understandable. And if you have got help desks, call centers, and technical supports, they will also have to provide information on the accessibility of the services and support in accessible formats. As I said, going to the specific requirements for e-commerce, we have that the provision of information concerning the accessibility of the product of the service being sold when this information is provided by the responsible economic operator. So the e-commerce provider does not need to create this information. When this information is available, it has to be shown, it has to be provided during the e-commerce service. Then we have an obligation to ensure the accessibility of the functioning for identification, security, payment when delivered as part of the service instead of a separate product, but making it perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So in other words, if you have a different device for identification or for the securing the payment, the device has to be accessible, but also the service if it is just an online service. And finally, providing identification methods, electronic signatures, and payment services which are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So all the change of buying will have to be also accessible with this specific specific requirements. There are similar requirements that are included in the obligations for consumer banking services. I mentioned these to ensure that even when if it is not clear when you are interacting with your bank for the e-commerce, they are also addressing the accessibility of the identification methods, electronic signatures, security and payment services, as well as having the information on the service, on the consumer banking service, in a way that is understandable. And there is a limit to the complexity of the language, that is level B2 of the Council of Europe Common European Framework of Reference Language. So these are the main accessibility provisions in the directive. And to finish, just to say that, okay, we have in June the first deadline to have a draft standardization mandate in the standardization committee. We are working with my colleagues to make that happening. And soon we will be able to circulate this draft also among stakeholders. And I want to make a plea for all stakeholders to participate in the process, from the disability community, accessibility experts, but also from the sectors that are involved and addressed in the scope of the directive. The next the deadline after will be the transposition, which is next year, also June, and then we will have in 2025 the application of the directive. So this is what I wanted to present. And I hope at least you get a flavor of how the Accessibility Act will work, and in particular in this area of e-commerce. So I give you back the floor, Susanne, and thanks for the attention.
Thank you, Ima. Very good and very impressive to be able to present such a complex matter in such a short time. So thank you very much for doing that for us. So any questions for Ima? We will take them by the end. I would like to now give the floor to the rest of the panel as well, so we can have a little bit of a discussion or dialogue around this. So just to, as an introduction to the panel discussion, I would like to say that these are really exciting times. Well, I always say there are exciting times, but now it's really true that it is exciting for everyone who is working in the accessibility market or accessibility business for some time, because in the last couple of years, a lot really has happened in the European market. We have moved from kind of soft recommendations on accessibility to formal legislation with directives covering all member states. So the current legislation covers public sector bodies, the Web Accessibility Directive, that is what is already in there. And with the European Accessibility Act, we are taking the next big step towards also covering parts of the commercial sector. So I must say I'm personally quite surprised in a positive way to see how the market is reacting to this. I didn't think they would, the market or the e-commerce and other sectors that are covered by the legislation would be so fast moving, because they are really mainly positive and very proactive. I think they really want to understand the upcoming requirements in advance and be able to prepare. So, and I don't want to offend our clients in public sector, but there is a big difference compared to the similar situation before the Web Accessibility Directive. And my impression there was most of the public sector were well, asleep for a long time before something happened. So very, very happy to see that the private sector is more proactive here. And to discuss the different aspects of this new landscape that we are moving into, we have a very distinguished panel with us today, including policymakers, the industry concerned, the consumers, and the end users with disabilities. So all of them represented by EU-level umbrella organizations or similar. So we have, of course, Ima to present or represent the policy level here. And I'm also very happy to welcome Leon Meulenberg, Senior Policy Advisor at ECommerce Europe, which is an umbrella association with members from across the EU, EFTA, and also candidate countries, representing more than 100,000 companies selling goods and services online to consumers in Europe. So thank you very much for being with us today. We also have an old friend of mine, Chiara Giovanni from ANEC, the member organization representing consumers in standardization, usually referred to as the European Consumer Voice, I think. in standardization, and ANEC contributes actively to the development of technical standards and has an interest in the enforcement of EU legislation connected to standards. So ANEC is of course engaged across sectors, focusing on consumer protection, sustainability, and equal access to products and services. So thank you for being here with us today and talking from the consumer perspective. And I also know that you need to run exactly 3 o'clock, so I will let you go. And I'm also very happy to have Lars Bosselmann here, who is the director of the European Blind Union, EBU. And the European Blind Union is an umbrella organization representing disabled persons organizations from all over Europe, working to protect and promote the interests of all blind and partially sighted people in Europe. So thank you, all of you, for being here. And the first question I would like to ask, and I would like to start with Lars, because in my mind we are doing this for the end users with disabilities. So the end user perspective is always the most important thing from my perspective, even if I know the inner market is also there. So Lars, in your view, what will the impact be on of the European Accessibility Act if you think of your own organization and other possible stakeholders here? What do you see as the impact?
First, I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, we do.
I shall also, for the sake of visibility, activate my video now. Okay. Thank you first of all, thank you for having me and EBU on this panel. Very glad to be here. Try to be as brief as I can be to answer your question. Of course, as Ima also said in her introduction, of course we're assessing at the time of this meeting, of course, a potential for the future, and we cannot assess something that we already evaluate because it's not fully in place and implemented, of course, as we speak. But the potential, of course, from our point of view is immense. Of course, overall, we would have also hoped for even more inclusion of other sectors, including built environment, with more specifications in the directive. But overall, the assessment is very, very positive from EBU's perspective. And more specifically, of course, the topic of today's meeting, our webinar, is obviously everything that is related to, let's say, e-communication, stroke then especially on e-commerce today. This, of course, has a massive importance. I probably don't need to overemphasize this here, given the audience and the panel. Even before the pandemic that we just saw and that we are slowly but surely, hopefully at least, moving out, has underlined, of course, the growth of the e-commerce and many e-services overall. And this has only been accelerated by the last events in the last 18 months or so, and will not stop with, even if the pandemic hopefully will be over in the current form soon. So what that means then is that everything that is not accessible in terms of electronic and e-communication, e-commerce, and website accessibility, actually, as it gains importance overall for society, the more it would exclude people, in our case, people who are partially or blind. So in other words, to turn it in a more positive way, the Accessibility Act, of course, tackles this in a very good way overall, and very promising way. As I said, we of course have to wait to the practical implementation of it, but the potential is immense, and the need is also immense. That maybe I should say that, and we'll probably come to that in the question 2 and 3 a bit more. Of course, there are today, as we speak, there are many barriers also for blind and partially sighted people when accessing
Lars, sorry to interrupt you, but we really need to hear from the other panelists as well.
We can.
Yeah. So thank you very much. I would like to hear from Chiara. So the more overall consumer perspective, what's your thoughts about the potential impact of the Accessibility Act?
Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you very much for organizing such an interesting event. It is a great pleasure and honor to be with you today. As the association representing consumers in standardization, we've been advocating for many years for more accessibility of of consumers to products and services, because we are facing a problem in terms of discrimination. It is a basic consumer right to have access to products and services. And if not all consumers can access products and services, we are facing discrimination. We therefore welcome very much the European Accessibility Act. We have been working together with the European Commission in creating it, and then with the co-legislators in adopting it. We think it will push the market in the right direction. And of course, we are ready now to work on the technical standards that will support the implementation of the Act. Why do we believe that the market needs a little bit of a push? Because a market is composed by traders and consumers. Consumers have all kinds of ages and abilities, and traders need to meet all consumer demands. As explained by Imam, the Accessibility Act is based on functional accessibility requirements in terms of general objective. They can be adapted to the specific situations. It provides also a clear distribution of obligations across the different economic operators in a proportionate manner according to their role in the supply and distribution process.
Thank you very much. So let's talk to and see what the industry thinks here. So Leon, from the e-commerce side, you're 100,000 members, so must be difficult to speak with one voice for all of them, but but still, sort of in general, if it's possible to say something in general, what does the e-commerce industry think about the potential here of the impact of the Accessibility Act? What's the feeling out there?
First, let me thank you for organizing this and be member of the panel on behalf of e-commerce. As said, we really represent some 100,000 web shops, small, big, and very big web shops. So there is a different interest. But at the first moment when in 2017 the new act became law in Europe, we were interested in it, and we started to give the information on the Accessibility Act to our members and to our web shops, As we see, since that time, web shops have been taken up diverse initiatives to let me say first become aware of the fact that there is a accessibility problem, and I think that's the best thing of the act, that it made web shops aware of the fact that there is a large group of customers which are excluded because of the fact that they don't have access to the websites in a proper way. And that's also a big chance for the industry, because to be blunt, we just miss about 15% of the turnover if we forget the people who don't have access to our websites because of any disability. So there is also a business model in it to let me say promote accessibility along our members. And we see in practice we see all kind of initiatives, although we see the first phase now as let me say a playground where we start to invent, to inventorize what's possible, and that's where we need communication with all involved groups, because the disabled people can tell us what they need and what's possible. So we think cooperation is key in this, and secondly, adding awareness. And we see, for instance, in the Netherlands, we developed a let me say, an app for websites, a test for websites, a self-assessment test to test their website on accessibility. We first launched it in 2019. It was very simple, and then we went to the government, and the government saw the good initiative, and now we are improving this self-assessment tool, and it will be launched in June, somewhere June and July this year. Not only for web shops, but for all websites on accessibility, where you can test as a website yourself, let me say, the basic principles of accessibility. And the nice thing about the tool is that it gives you a view on the turnover you miss, so the profit you miss, because you're not accessible to everybody, and it gives you some key proposals how to, let me say, improve your website on accessibility. Thank you.
Thank you. That's interesting to know that there is somebody actually who is trying to show the kind of potential in economic terms, also in accessibility tools. So that's really interesting. I didn't know about that. So so Imma, I know you are restricted what you can say. You cannot say everything you feel about legislation, of course, from the Commission. But anyway, what's your, if I can get that kind of a personal view for you, what's your, I mean, this is your baby, but what do you see the potential here? What impact will this legislation actually have?
Well, I really hope it will have a lot of potential, a lot of impact, sorry. The potential is clear. I mean, it's really setting up a framework for requiring accessibility of ICT, and it has a direct impact of the products and services in the scope, but also it has an immense impact for new technological developments, because requirements for accessibility are there. Also, we have the whole procurement processes that are covered by the requirements of the Act, and also the use of EU funds, which more and more we are requiring to use them in a way that they are accessible. So I think it will really shape the European market. I hope that it will really make a fundamental difference, not only, as I said, for the current products, but also once you have more professionals in the ICT sector being knowledgeable and experienced on how to make products and services, I think that will have an immense spillover effect for other types of products that might not be specifically captured here. So this is really my my view.
Yeah, exactly. Like we have the spillover effect from the Web Accessibility Directive, which is kind of only covering public sector, but we see also that ICT companies who sell to public sector, they need to know about accessibility. So that's kind of how it spreads in a very nice way. So I agree with you. I think that we will have this spillover effect. So let's go back to the business case here, because I know Imma has invited me to speak several times on different events about the business case for accessibility. We've tried to show this in many different ways during the years, and everyone is, or not everyone, but most people in, at least who are sort of inside of the accessibility ecosystem, we believe there is a business case. But it's really hard to kind of prove it in a good way. So I'm happy to hear that the e-commerce in the Netherlands have tried to do something against this. This sounds like a very good idea. But to get back to Leon, if there is truly a business case, and you seem to, and many other e-commerce companies also seem to really think that, okay, we are missing an opportunity here, so we need to be more accessible. So how come they didn't know this before? I mean, why did they? I'm just curious how it's a bit strange. I mean, if there is a business opportunity, why do we need legislation to show that business opportunity? It's kind of doesn't really make sense to me.
To be frank, we as an e-commerce business, we thought we were very accessible, but because we don't have hindrances for wheelchairs and so on and so on and so on, because it's all digital. But in our bluntness, we forgot that there are other disabilities making access to web shops a problem, like blindness, like color blindness, like deafness, all kind of disabilities, which made the access to our web shops a lot difficult for those people. So it was really awakening up, this act, to look to ourselves. It made look to ourselves and say, okay, what's on the accessibility of our website? How do we cope with colors? How do we cope with contrast? How do we cope with machine readable text? How do we cope with pictures and videos and so on? And of course, it first needs awareness of that there is a problem to do something about it. But I think we picked it up, and we try to pick it up again and again, and try to include, because e-commerce doesn't want to exclude anybody. We want to be a very inclusive channel for everybody. So if we have a possibilities, and digital offers a lot of possibilities in the field of accessibility, we have to do it. But we have to do it with the whole chain. So when we look to e-commerce, for instance, a normal web shops is nothing more than a box mover. And we get a product from a producer or from the importer. We even get the pictures and the videos from the producer or the manufacturer or the importer. And so we think this awareness will have an effect through the whole chain. So we are dependent on payment systems. We are dependent on delivery systems. We have let me say, we need apps. We use apps. So we use very small screens. We use mobile devices, and we think to make it a success, it's not only a matter of making the web shops accessible, but the whole chain has to provide for, let me say, the same as we see in privacy, for, let me say, accessibility by design. So when we come to this, it will also make it much more easier for web shops to have their pictures and the videos in a format with alt text and so on. So it needs an effort not only of the sellers in the end of the chain, but also in let me say, from the production of services and products till, let me say, the waste and let me say of the product till the end of the chain, that we care for accessibility and care for systems and standards that will get, let me say, common use for everybody. And I think we're now on the way, because of the awareness, that the whole chain will change in a positive way, and will start to think at the first moment when they are creating a product, when it starts in the chain, to make it accessible by design. And that's I think the big challenge.
Happy, Leon, because you're saying two things that I really like. One is that you want to do the right thing, you just weren't aware, and the legislation actually helped. So I'm usually very skeptical to the legislation as a tool, but what you're saying is that it really helps. When the act came aboard, you said, oh, we need to fix this, and then there is a possibility for fixing it. So that's really positive. Then the act is really helpful. And then the second thing is that you really believe that your members or your organizations really want to do the right thing, and we just need to sort of support them. So hopefully IAAP, with its professional certification and members and sort of trying to make sure that we have a community around this, can also help supporting all of this. And that's really, I think we needed the driving force for also sort of return on investment of accessibility is also equally important as the rest of this. So that's really positive to hear. Chiara, what's your view on this? I mean, in the standardization world, there's also a lot of industry always discussing the pros and cons of standards and requirements, and usually some pushback sometimes when we try to post technical specifications and requirements on the industry and so on. But what's your view on this? Is there a business case? Is this kind of true, or is this just something we want to see because we care about the consumers? What's your view?
I'm not sure the question is the right one, in the sense that from our side, what we see is that consumer spending is more than 50% of the European gross domestic product. That was before the pandemic, and we believe it will be also in the future. So the European economy is based on more than 50% on consumer spending. For reasons of economic and societal benefit, the consumers have to be at the center of this economy and especially of the recovery that we are hopefully starting soon. In e-commerce, we believe that the resilient ecosystems, as has been explained, it's not only about the website, it's all what's behind. Those ecosystems are based on an healthy and balanced relationship between the offer and the demand. And the demand is based on consumer needs. And consumer needs, again, I stress it, they come because consumers have all kinds of ages and abilities. And if you think about our internal market at the European level, we never say there is a business case for safety. We just decided with legislation 25 and more years ago to have safety legislation with safety standards. And now we are going to do the same with the accessibility, and we're going to have accessibility standards because they are conditions for an healthy market. They are preconditions, I would say. And don't forget that without confident consumers, the demand of products and services will not be optimized. And I think that has been confirmed by the previous speaker. So again, I believe the legislation is not only there to create and impose things, but also to raise awareness and perhaps create another market that we are not discussing so much, but I think it's of interest to the audience today, is who is going to design those websites, who is going to create the software for those websites to be then put online. And there are problems in terms of a number of accessibility web designers, etc., etc. But we know that the Accessibility Act will also increase the demand, the professional demand, and therefore the offer. Again, trust and confidence of consumers are always at the key of whatever market we are discussing. I don't think there is an accessibility market. I think there is accessibility as a precondition of an healthy market.
That's very beautifully put. Thank you, Chiara. That's very good. So we don't have any specific questions in the Q&A yet. We had one question from the open chat, which is kind of future leaning. So why don't we take that? How do the panelists envision to move from thinking about disabled people as the end user rather than co-creation to equitably, no, I can't say that, I'm sorry, enforce the legislation? It's a good question. That's very visionary. So let's see, does anyone want to take a stab on that and try to make it short, please, if possible?
Sure, I can, if you wish.
Yes, please.
Okay, so first to say that that is the spirit that the Accessibility Act has. But we have to acknowledge that persons with disabilities, the same than anybody else, have got many facets and many different roles, one of them being consumers and being end users, but also they can contribute and participate to be creators of products, of services, of websites, and also to participate in enforcement. And in fact, I mean, the enforcement of the Act, where persons with disabilities can go to court and claim the enforcement of the Act is part of it, and also their participation in the working group with market surveillance authorities and authorities responsible for compliance of service will provide a platform for being also part of the enforcement of the legislation and improve the enforcement of the legislation.
Yeah, very good. Chiara, did you want to add something?
Yes, speaking about enforcement, I can tell you that enforcement is one of the most important part of consumer protection in general. If you look at consumer protection legislation, you can see that enforcement was considered as weak and has been strengthened in all kinds of legislation. And I'm talking about both public and private enforcement. We refer to public enforcement when we refer to market surveillance, for example, and Ima explained very well the role of the market surveillance authority. We refer to private enforcement when we refer to the complaint system that the Accessibility Act foresees in Article 29. The fact that as an individual consumer, you can complain, but you can also get the help of an association behind you. And this is really what it's an enabler for lack of accessibility or for whatever problem that has been present in the e-commerce experience, for example. But also the role of persons with disabilities can also be before the enforcement, because enforcement is really when something goes wrong. We need to take care of it in the legislation. It has been done, but we can also work towards compliance. Increase compliance. And this is the role that standards will have under the Accessibility Act. They are harmonized standards. They provide presumption of conformity with the legislation. And the standards are supposed to be representing the views of all the stakeholders, produced and drafted with the contributions of everyone in order to increase compliance and so avoid enforcement. But we are not naive, and we know that enforcement is there for private consumers to use and also for public authorities to police the market if needed.
Okay, thank you. So we need to close soon, but I would like Lars from EBU to also answer a little bit of co-creation. How do we sort of involve users, end users with disabilities in a better way to ensure that the products and services provided are also covering accessibility needs? What's the kind of end user reflection?
As said, I think very clearly and eloquently by Ima, of course, persons with disabilities and blind and partially sighted in our case, we are both end users and consumers, but can also be shop creators or runners of business or whatever. So our decision makers. So it's of course a whole range. But if we take this example of the end consumer perspective for the time being, then I think it's indeed, especially in the area of accessibility, very critical to provide that forum, let's call it, where constructive feedback and complaints can be given, can be provided, so that there is an improvement. Because in many, it is quite a complex issue where often it's not black or white, it's compliant or it's not compliant. At the end of the day, it is, but the technical solutions and what needs to be fixed and done is sometimes a little bit in a sort of gray zone in the middle area between, yes, this should be done or this could be done. And easy solutions are sometimes can be found at a sort of pragmatic, let's say, level as well. And I think that is very important to provide that forum, that space to allow for that constructive, let's say, complaint mechanism, which before it goes to any more legal complaints and maybe even to the court cases, which of course need to be there clearly at the end of the day, that also has to be there. And I think this middle space, middle ground is really something I would like to emphasize. And the Act here clearly provides for that space, but of course needs to now be filled with content and life in the next years. Yeah, that's very good. It's true. Feedback is truly a gift, and we can really sort of everyone can support each other in making sure that the Act becomes successful. So I know we have two people that needs to run at 3 o'clock sharp. So I need to finalize this very clear. But I wanted to give also the floor to Leon, who is waving nicely.
So if I give you a minute to say something really, really clever, you can end it.
Okay, seen the time frame of 28 June 2025, where we have to be ready for this new act. We see that most websites have a life cycle of 3 years. So, and it's very hard to change an existing website into an accessible website. But if you are planning to have a new website, it's easier to have a website by design from scratch on than to change a new website. Let's use this time and the knowledge that most of the websites change once in 3 years to have a roadmap for in 3 years where all the web shops will be accessible. Thank you.
That is a very good ending of this, I think, for the panel. So let's get started. And I also want to pick up something you said before, that, and also Ima said, that we let this spread to other markets as well, so that we have the full range, the full circle, or the full ecosystem of e-commerce, and also banking and transportation and all the other parts of the Accessibility Act, of course, that this really is spreading not only to the organizations and companies that are specifically covered by the legislation, but also to everyone else, because then we really could get this snowball effect that I think we were kind of looking for. So thank you very much for this very nice little chat today. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. It was very, very good to have you here, and many very good formulated thoughts around this. So I'm sorry we couldn't keep this going for another hour or so, but for everyone, the participants and also the panelists, of course, don't forget the drop-in we have on the 2nd of June at 4 p.m. Central European time, where you can ask any questions about the Act if you'd like to, but also specifically on the IAAP membership benefits, of course. It's free of charge. We have the next webinar in this series on the 17th of June, when we focus on another favorite topic of mine, which is the Web Accessibility Directive review. And we are soon after that webinar, we will open I'm talking like I am the European Commission, I'm sorry, but the public consultation will open for the review of the directive. So we have a very interesting panel also on the 17th, covering all the latitudes of the European monitoring agencies in different parts of Europe and Commission and so on. So here's where you can actually have your say about the directive, and it can change, it may change if we have a good feedback on it. So after the summer, we will then be back with more webinars, an EU topical newsletter, and please do provide us feedback, comments, ideas. We want volunteers for the European initiative and so on. And I know that Rachel have all the names, so you can thank the interpreters in a good way. So I leave the ending words to you.
Okay, this is Rachel. Thank you, Susanna, and thank you to all our panelists for today's discussion. I did post in the chat the link to join the follow-up Q&A on June 2nd. And then the third one, after the third webinar, I believe it is on Monday, the 21st. And special thanks to our ASL interpreters today, Barbie and Paula, and to our captionists for providing our captions. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. And we'll have the recording posted on the IAAP YouTube within the next day or so.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.